Welcome to this Trap CG tutorial series. This is an introduction to 3D Studio Max, and we're going to be going over how to build that desk scene you saw in the demo. Now, I'm using 3D Studio Max 2016, but you can use older versions, at least all the way back to 3D Studio Max 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. If you go older than that, I can't guarantee anything. I will be showing the old school ways of doing things along with the new school, so you should be fine. Now, before I begin in 3D Studio Max, let's talk about file management. So I'm going to go to open a computer folder. Now, I never saved to my C drive, which means I never saved to my desktop. The more you fill up your C drive, the slower your computer will run. If you don't have a choice, then I'm sorry, but I try to do everything to a secondary drive. And I did create a folder already. Let's see, tutorials. So 3DM desk for 3D Studio Max desk. I have to be specific about which software I'm building the tutorial for nowadays. And I have one folder in here already called reference, or ref. That's for my reference images. And I already took one of my desk. Yep. Now in the demo you saw an iMac. I will be building out an iMac, not a Samsung monitor. You'll notice I only have one Samsung monitor now because the other one burnt out. It was a very sad day. Died a little inside, cried. We had a funeral and everything. So anyway, this is the reference that I'll be using for the overall desk idea. Let's go ahead and minimize this. Go back to the main desk folder. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to right click, say new folder, call it 3D. This will save all my 3D files. And I'm going to create one more folder, right click, new folder called text, for short for texture. So that's where I'm going to save all my textures. If you don't know what textures are, don't worry, we'll be going over that later. So that's the file structure. Let me go ahead and minimize this. So this is the startup screen for 3D Studio Max 2016. I'm not going to be utilizing it, so let me go ahead and close it. And right off the bat, let's just save to our folder. So I'm going to come up here to this icon here, or this one, and click save. And let's go ahead and find the location. So I had it under work 2, Trap CG, tutorials, 3D, there we go. Call it desk _1. Right off the bat, if you don't see this in your 3D Studio Max, it's because you're running a really old version of 3D Studio Max, and don't worry, I'll rarely use it, but it's called the Graphite Modeling Tools. I'm just going to minimize it to increase screen real estate. Now the area that we're going to focus on right now is the 3D viewports. This is where we're going to create everything. So we're just going to jump right in. I'm not going to sit there and try to go explain everything. But as we're going along, you'll learn what we're doing. So you'll learn the tools as you create. So to start with, let's go back to the reference image. I'm going to create this glass piece right here. Okay. So it's roughly 3 feet by 2 feet deep and ½ inch thick, I think, something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to click on this over here. This is the create panel. Click on the word box, and I'm going to left click in my top viewport and drag. So I'm holding down the left click and I'm dragging. And you can see here it's creating a box. Now I'm going to let go of the mouse and I'm going to move the mouse up, and it's going to create some depth. And I'm going to click. So now we just created our first 3D box. Now to maneuver in the viewports, if you hold down the middle mouse button, it pans. Any viewport that you hold down the middle mouse button, it pans. Now if you scroll the middle mouse button, it zooms in and zooms out. Okay. And if you hold down Control and Alt in the middle mouse button, it does a smooth zoom. And last but not least, if you hold down Alt in the middle mouse button, it rotates. So let's say you rotated one of these orthographic views. That's what we call these flat views, is orthographic views. This was the front viewport, so I can either click on the word front in the view cube area here, or I can click on the word orthographic and go down to front. So this is the views that I have. So I can switch it to top, bottom, front, back, left. I'm going to switch it back to front, which has a shortcut key of F. Okay. Now this view is being displayed as wireframe. It says right here, wireframe. This view is being displayed as realistic. Okay. So if I click on the word wireframe, I can switch this to realistic if I wanted to. I'm going to go back to wireframe, and I can even switch this down here to wireframe, or switch it back to realistic. Now there's two options that are very similar, realistic and shaded. You'll see that you don't really see a difference. Realistic kind of adds shadows to the scene and does a little bit of a better job displaying textures. but shaded usually runs the viewport better. So I'm going to switch to shaded mode. Okay. Now, if you do not have shortcut keys or a keyboard to maneuver these viewports, you can actually come down here. Here's the pan tool, the little hand icon. Here's the zoom tool, little magnifying glass icon. And here's the rotate tool. Now, if you click down on the rotate, you can actually have other options to navigate the viewport. Okay. And again, we're using left click to navigate. Now, these other options are zoom all. That gives me the ability to zoom all viewports at the same time. Zoom extends means that whatever I have selected in the scene, it will frame it in the selected viewport, or I can say zoom extends all windows, and it will frame all windows with the selected object. And this little corner option is maximize viewport. So if I click it, the viewport that I'm in gets maximized to full screen. Okay. You can also come here to this plus sign and say maximize viewport. So you have a couple of ways of actually navigating the viewports. The last thing I want to address in the viewports is this grid. A lot of times this grid actually gets in my way. To get rid of it, I can hit the plus sign and click on show grid, or G on the keyboard. So I'm going to do that to each one of these. Okay, so let me come up to here. This is your selection tool. This allows you to select objects without moving them. So if I click off the object, I can click back on the object. I can click and drag. So again, this is left click. Left click and drag. I have options for selecting. I can select by name. So if I click this, a menu will pop up. Next tool over is how I select. So right now it's set to square. I can set it to circle. I can even set it to drawing, and this is like a hard edge draw. So I click and drag. And I have freehand draw and spray paint selection. So those are my selection types. I'm going to switch it back to square selection. The icon next to it is how I select, meaning that I can either just barely touch the object and it'll still select, or I have to have the object completely inside the selection to be able to select it. So you can see here, no matter what I do, I can't select it unless I go all the way over it. Okay. So those are your selection. Then you have move, rotate, and scale. So I'm going to click on the move tool. Now the shortcut key for these is Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, R is scale. So Q, W, E, and R in that order. So I'm going to go to my move tool. And in here, I can actually maneuver my object. If I roll over the X axis, I can move it just on the X axis. If I roll over the Y, just the Y. If I roll over a center point, I can roll over two axes, X and Z in this case. Okay. Or I can come down here and manually adjust the slider or type in a specific number. Pretty simple. So I'm going to set all these to 0 because I like to build things on the 0 axis. So I'm going to right click, and that automatically sets whatever's in that dial to 0. Okay. So now you've learned how to move. Rotate and scale work off the same principle. Gives you a little gizmo. That's what this is called, as a gizmo. And I can rotate it, and it's based off the rotation of the pivot point. I'm going to undo that. Control Z is the shortcut key for undo, or this icon up here, undo, redo, if you don't have a keyboard access. So I can rotate on specific axes, Control Z. And of course, scale is the last option. I tend to not use scale on an object that I just created. It's actually very bad because when you create an object, it gives it its initial scale. And then when you use the scale tool, it adds it's like almost like initial scale plus the new scale. And if you export to another program, it might not like the plus new scale. And when you're rigging, it definitely doesn't like it. So I tend to rarely use this on the object like this. Let's see here. So that's scale, rotate, and move. So moving forward, let's go to the modify panel. Okay, so in the modify panel, I get the settings, length, width, and height. Now these numbers mean nothing to me. We actually want to switch this to something that we can understand. So when we're modeling, we can build in real world scale. And that way when we create lighting, the lighting will interact with the objects more accurately. So I'm going to come up to customize. I'm going to scroll down to unit setup. And I'm going to change it to either metric or US standard, whatever you're more familiar with. I'm going to click on US standard. And I like to switch to the last option, which is feet with decimal inches. I'm not a fractions person. So the default units is feet. So that way when I type in, let's say 2 in here, it's going to give me 2 feet. If I switch it to inches, it would give me 2 inches. So if it's a large scene, I work with feet. If it's a small scene, I work with inches. If it's a large scene that has small objects that I got to model, then I'll bounce back and forth just to speed up my time so I don't have to keep playing around with how I type numbers in. So I'm going to start with feet. I'm going to click OK. All right, so now you can see here I'm getting an actual scale. So right now this is 8 feet in length. I'm going to switch this to 2. And the width I'm going to set to, let's say, 3. So it's 2 feet by 3 feet. And the thickness I'm going to say 0.5. You can see here it's 0.5 inches. And that looks more like the glass that's sitting on our desk right here. Okay, so now you've been taught how to scale and move and rotate around your viewport. Again, Alt middle mouse button is rotate. That's the shortcut key. And also, if you don't want to keep coming down to here to grab the rotate tool, you can actually click and drag on the view cube and it'll rotate the viewport. So pretty cool stuff. Now, these segments, if I come into my top viewport right here and I activate these segments or increase them for more than 1, you can see it adds more lines. That's basically what segments are, lines. Adding more geometry to the object so we can modify it more. In this case, I don't need it. Now, if you want to see that on your solid object, because you notice we couldn't see it on our solid object, I can switch my viewport shaded to edge faces, and now I can see the extra geometry being created. So I'm going to set that to 0. Okay. Let's see here. Is there anything else in this area? So you've got length segments, height segment, or width segments and height segments. So I'm going to maximize this viewport, Alt W. I'm going to zoom out. So in my reference image, you can't tell, but this is an L desk, and over here is another piece of glass that's the same length. So I'm going to duplicate this object. Now I can come up to Edit and click on Clone, Control V, or I can hold down Shift and drag the object over. You can see it creates a clone menu. So if you don't have the keyboard for shortcut keys, go Edit, Clone, or just hold down Shift and drag it over. So it gives me 3 options: copy and instance and reference. Really the top 2 are the ones that we want to mess with. Now if I wanted to make an independent copy, so it exists on its own settings, I would choose copy. If I wanted to make it an instance, meaning that no matter if I changed the first object, the second one would change, then I would want instance. Now I'll show you what that means here in a sec. I am going to choose instance because these 2 glass pieces are the same. And I'm going to name this to desk glass 1. Actually, this one's 2. And I'll copy this name. Control C on the keyboard. Click OK. I think you can also right click. So let's find out. If I right click, yeah, I can right click and copy. Just in case, again, you don't have a keyboard to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. And this will be, actually this one is glass 2. Let me select this guy and change it to glass 1. So here's glass 1, glass 2. It's a very good idea to start naming your objects so they're easily found. All right, so let's move this into position. And that's somewhere right around here for now. And then let's rotate it. So I can go up to my rotate tool and I can actually rotate it along the Z-axis. But that's going to be very difficult to rotate it exactly 90 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to undo that, Control Z. If I come down here, I can actually scroll the dial up or just type in 90. That's another way to do it. The last way, again, if you don't have a keyboard to type, is turn on Rotate Snap. And now when I rotate the object, it's rotating every 5 degrees, you can see here. So it makes it easier to snap it to 90 degrees. If you right-click on the Rotate Snap, you can change the angle at which it's rotating from 5 degrees to 10, 20. You can put in any number you want in here. I could have put 90 if I wanted to. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back to my Move tool. Again, W on the keyboard. Move it down. And move it on the X-axis. Now I'm not going to be too picky about it right now because I'm going to create the corner piece first. But that's a good start. So I have my 2 glass pieces. Let's create the corner piece. So looking at the reference image, it's almost like 1/4 of a cylinder. So let's start with a cylinder. Go to my Create panel. Click on Cylinder. Click and hold the mouse down to drag to create the diameter. And then I'm going to let go and bring the mouse up to create the height. Okay, so there's our first cylinder that you've ever created. Go to my move tool. I can set the XYZ to 0, 0, 0 for now. And go to my modify panel. Now I'm going to set the radius later because I'm going to have to adjust that as we go along. But the height, I'm going to set to 0.8 because the wood is actually a little bit thicker than the glass. And I can see that as I'm actually looking at my desk right now. The height segments I'm going to set to 1 because I don't need all those extra height segments that were in the center here. If I dial those back up, you can see there they are. That's too problematic for what I'm going to do with this piece. So I'm going to set it to 1. Cap segments, I don't want any, but if I dial that up, you'll see that it adds a cap segment. And then sides, I can dial that up if I needed more geometry. And I might later, but right now you can see it's fairly low res, but we are going to slice it. So I'm going to turn on slice, and I'm going to just dial up slice from to, let's say, 90. Voila, now I have my piece. So I'm going to go ahead and move it. Let's see, I'm going to actually switch to my top view. So I'm going to go Alt W, come here in my top, and I'm going to move it down to where, zoom in here. Again, scrolling the middle mouse button to something like that. I'm going to use the rotate tool. I'll rotate it exactly 90. And I'll move it back into position. So there's a little bit of space between the glass and the wood. So something like that. It's probably good. So now I'm going to go to this glass piece. And if I roll over the center here and click, that gives me the ability to maneuver both X and Y. So I can click in here and drag it up. So something like that. That looks good. Now this blue for this wood is fairly hard to see. In fact, actually, let's just change the color of all these pieces. So I'm going to select the 2 glass pieces by selecting the first one and then holding down Control, selecting the second one. Click on this little pink color here in the modify panel and change it to light blue. Okay, now I'm going to click on the piece of wood. Click here and I'll change that to like a light brown. There. And of course, later on, we're actually going to give these real textures, but at least for right now, that's a good start. So let's go back to the corner piece. Let's name this desk wood C for corner and increase the radius. We're actually going to just set it to 2 because we know that the depth of this glass is 2. Voila. So the next piece that we want to create is these 2-inch wide wood pieces on the side. So if I go to the desk piece or the glass piece, I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over. This time I'm going to set it to copy instead of instance. I'm going to call this desk wood 2-inch _1 because we're going to have more than one. So desk wood 2-inch, click OK. And now when I drag this over, let's set the value of the width to 2 inches. Voila. And I can position it. Let's say it's probably good right there. All right, so the height, I'm going to set to the same height as this piece of wood here. So I'm going to say 0.8. There we go. And I'll switch the color to the same color as I have over there. So I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over. I'm going to set, I just need one copy. This time I'm going to make it an instance so it mirrors this object here. And I'll call it just 2. Click OK, and I'll go to my rotate tool. Rotate the object exactly 90. And then I can use my align tool, which I'm going to come over here. This is the align tool. Click on it and click on the desk. I'll do it in my 3D viewport. So click on the glass piece, the second glass piece, and you can see here that the object jumps to it. And I can choose XYZ for position. I'm using the pivot points, which is that gizmo that you see in the center. And I can change the orientation to match and scale. So I'm just going to click OK and move it down. Into position. something like that. All right, so that's the top of the desk. Let's go ahead and hold down Control and select the middle the middle wood piece or the corner wood piece and this wood piece, so that I right now just have the wood pieces selected. You can see that they're highlighted. And I am going to go to my left viewport here and drag them down a little bit. They're going to be a little bit above the glass because, again, I'm just following what I see on my desk. So there we have it. Now we've completed the top of the desk. So let's save this. Okay, so let's create the metal structure underneath the glass and the wood. So I'm going to start with the metal bars that are underneath the wood here. So I'm going to click on this piece of wood, hit Z on the keyboard to zoom extents, and I'm going to go to my Move tool, hold down Shift and drag it down. I'm going to set this as a copy, and I'm going to say, let's see, metal bar square 1. Yep, copy metal bar square 1, we're good. So I'll set the width to, let's say, 1 inch, because it is a 1 inch by 1 inch bar. The height to 1 inch. Let me position it. Zoom in here. Grab it and put it in the corner, just like that. And now the length of it is a little bit shorter, so let's go ahead and set this to 1 foot 10 inches. Oops. Had that backwards. 1 foot 10 inches. There we go. And let's move it in the top viewport here. Just like that. Okay. So now we have the little bit of gap here. Let's switch the color to gray. Let's copy this bar over. So I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over, set it as an instance, and this is going to be metal bar square 2. Zoom in to position it correctly. Something like that. Good enough. Okay, so we have our 2 metal bars. Let's add the actual rail bars underneath the glass. So I'm going to go to the Create panel and create a cylinder. I'll just create it in my perspective. Okay, so the sides I'm going to set to 18. I don't need them 60. Radius I'm going to set to 0.4. And the reason why I know it's 0.4 is because the bars here were 1 inch. And so a radius of 0.4 means it's got a diameter of 0.8, which is just shy of 1 inch, the way I want it. And the height is the length of the glass. So let's say 3 feet, but let's give it an extra inch. So let's go 3 feet, 1 inch. And let's rotate that into position. 90 degrees, we're good. Let's move it. And something like, that's about centered. And if I want to, I can activate my, oops, not mirror tool, cancel. I'm going to activate my align tool. Click on my glass. And this time I want to position it off the X position. Usually all these are checked. I'll turn off X and Y, or Z and Y, and I'll say center. Okay. So instead of using the pivot point to center it, I'm using the center of the object. Click OK. So that's perfectly centered on the glass. Now I'm going to move it up a little bit, probably to about there. Change the color to a gray because again it's metal. And let's go ahead and hold down Shift, copy it up. Make sure it's set to instance. I should have renamed the first one. Metal bar 2. Let me copy this name, Control C. Instance, OK. Come back to here. Rename this to metal bar 1. All right, so now those are done. Let's create the legs. The legs are about 3 feet long, so I'm going to click this bar here. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it down, set it as a copy, metal leg underscore 1. And let's go ahead and rotate this guy 90 degrees. Perfect. Position it to the back side of this to about there. Maybe a little bit more. And let's move it down. Okay, and I can zoom in here. It's almost there, so let me just tab it down a little bit. There we go. Okay, so that's leg 1. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, no, there is a lot we need to do. We need to create 3 feet. Man, I almost forgot. So that's 3 feet. Let's push it down and use this to dial it down a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to hold down Shift, drag it over. This is going to be an instance, metal leg 2. And let's align it to this bar over here. I'm going to say pivot point, and just on the x-axis, click OK. And we're looking good. So let's create the front leg here. Now this front leg is slightly arced. Actually, it's arced a lot. So let me grab, grab this leg, hold down Shift, drag this forward, and I'm going to say a copy, metal leg bent, 1. Okay, let's move it back a little bit more. Maybe just a tad bit more. There we go. That's looking good. So we're going to add a modifier. We haven't talked about modifiers yet, but modifiers are things that we can add to the object. We're going to click this arrow and go to Edit Poly Modifier, or it's just called Edit Poly, but it is a modifier. If you do not see Edit Poly in the list, it means you're running a pretty old version of Max, so you need to right-click in here and convert it to, so it says Convert to Edit Poly. Now, if you don't even see that in the list, that means that you only have Edit Mesh, and man, I don't know how old that is. It's like 3D Studio Max 5 or something. But yeah, definitely want Edit Poly. So I'm going to go add it as a modifier. Now, adding it as a modifier gives me the ability to delete it if I don't like it by hitting this trash can. And it keeps the original box settings. So it's a nice way of modeling when you're not sure exactly how you're going to change the object. So this gives me access to vertex, edge, and polygons. These other two, border and element, are just extensions of edge and polygon. So vertices are the little dots. Let me go Alt-W to maximize this viewport. Are the little dots that you see in the viewport. Okay. Edges are the lines between the dots, or they're also called segments. And polygons are the faces that are created when you have 3 or more edges connected. So in this case I have 4, so it's a quad. If I had 3, it'd be a tri. So I'm going to go into vertex mode, and I'm going to drag select over the bottom vertices here. So none of the others are selected. And I'm going to go to my top viewport here and push them down. Let's zoom in, because I'm pushing them toward the front end of the desk, so I get this angle. Perfect. Now I'm going to go to edge mode. I'm going to drag select over the edges in the center here, and I'm going to use what they call connect. So I'm going to click connect, and you can see here it created some extra segments down the center here. Now I'm going to move that forward. Go to my side view here, move it forward. Something like that, because it starts out very steep and then it gradually smooths out. So let's say more like that. Okay, so I have that created. Let's go ahead and add another connection. Now you can come down to connect again, or you can right click and say connect, but I need to select the edges. So I can use the menu this time just to show you what the menu looks like. This gives me the ability to have more than one connection. You can see here I have 1 so far. Dial it up, now I have 2. Let me maximize this viewport. I can pinch the connections together. I can even slide the connections. So I'm going to set it back down to 1. Check mark applies it and closes this window. Plus sign applies it and keeps it open. So if I hit the plus sign, you can see it applied the connection. Come up here, select. Let's get ready to give me another connection. Hit the check mark this time to close the window. So that gave me the 2 connections I needed for right now. So I'm going to select this edge right here. I'm going to come to loop, and it loops all the way around, or Alt-L on the keyboard. So I'm going to push this forward. Now the shortcut keys for these are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's not on the numeric keypad, but actually on the normal keyboard. Okay. So I'm going to come up here and grab this edge, go loop, and push it forward. And then let me make one more selection here. Connect, check mark, push it forward. All right. Now it looks pretty jaded. It's not very good at all, actually, compared to the real world leg. So let's change that. I'm going to turn off edge mode. So I've got none of these highlighted, and you can either just click on it or click on the shortcut key for that tool. Now I'm going to add a new modifier called Turbo Smooth. So I'm going to go all the way down, Turbo Smooth. You can see it's been added to the list, and look, it smoothed it out, but it turned my leg into spikes. That's not very good at all. But we can control how it's smoothing. So I'm going to bring up the iterations to 2. It makes it even smoother. Look how sharp that looks. But I'm going to turn on smoothing groups. And you can see here it goes back to being a square. How does that working? Well, what it does is each polygon is assigned a number, and based off those numbers, it knows how to smooth. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to go back to Polygon mode, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to turn on Polygon mode. I'm going to scroll all the way down to Polygon Material IDs. Okay, so I'm going to turn off this mode right here. What this does is prevents me from seeing the stack, the modifiers in the stack above what I have selected. So you can see here now I'm back to the way it was looking. So if I click this polygon here, you can see it has a polygon smoothing group of 3. If I click the one next to it, it shares 3. So all these are set to 3. The ones on the sides are set to 5. This one is set to 7. This one is set to 2. And then the ones on the base have their own number as well. And it just randomly created those. So I can actually turn it off or turn it on or set it to any number I want. So to show you how cool this is, I'm going to turn this back on. And I'm going to select, actually I'm going to turn it off first. I'm going to select this polygon and this polygon. So I held down Control. I'm going to turn on the polygon mode. And I'm going to set 3 and 4 to both of them. I'm going to hit F4 to turn off wireframe, which is also, whoops, Control Z, I don't know what I just did. So I'm going to go back to shaded edge faces. So that's F4. Okay, so you can see here it really smoothed this out. Very helpful. I'm going to go back to edge faces. And again, I'm controlling it based off the numbers. So let me select this and go turn off smoothing groups and see how it's being applied. Go back to edit poly mode. I'm going to turn on polygon mode. Okay, so I'm going to undo these. Let's see, let's turn this off. This one is supposed to be 3. This one's supposed to be 5. Okay, that's good. All right, so that's how that works. I'm going to turn off polygon mode. Go all the way up to the top, click on it, close it out, and then go back to Turbo Smooth. You can see here it created a beautiful curved leg. And of course I can increase the segments to make it even smoother if I needed to. Okay, so that's iterations. I can even set it to render iterations, which means in the viewport it's not going to be so smooth, but in the render it will be. I'll leave that alone for now. Set it to 2. Now, over time, when you're building a huge scene, you probably want to right-click and collapse this stack. When you're done with it, you're not going to modify it because this does eat up resources the more things you have in a stack. So just keep that in mind. So let's create the suction cups now to go on the bars. Whoops, we need to actually position these bars correctly. So I'm going to select them both. Alt-W, go to my side view here, and push them down. That's good. Yep. Okay, so now there's dents in these bars we need to create. So all I need to do is work with one of them. I don't have to work with the other because it is an instance. So I'm going to add the edit poly modifier. And let's say I'm going to drag select, go to edge mode, drag select over the center, and go connect. I'm going to connect it twice, and I'm going to pinch it together. Let's say to about there, maybe a little bit more. Good. And now I'm going to hit the check mark, drag select over the center again. Now pay attention that make sure you're dragging all the way through it, because sometimes you might have this on, ignore back facing, and if I try drag selecting over the object now, it doesn't select the back edges because it ignores them. So let me drag select over this and go connect again. Reset the pinch and click check mark. So I'm good with that. Now in my front view here, viewport here, I'm going to zoom in, drag select over these top vertices, pull them down a little bit, Dragged over these, pull them down. Actually, I'm going to undo that. I don't want to do the top 4, just the top 3. Down, down, and the very top one's down a little bit. There we go. So I've created the dent here, you can see, in this viewport. I'm going to turn off vertex mode. Let's do the side ones, because there's 3 suction cup pieces to each one. So let's select this, go connect. I'm going to pinch them together to about, let's say, there, and slide it over. Say to about, that's good. So I'm going to hit the check mark. And now I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. It should automatically position the edges where I need them. If not, I would have to slide them. And that's good. So I'm going to hit the check mark. Drag select over the center of these 2. And hit connect. Set the values to 0. And check mark. All right, so now I need to inset a polygon on the top. So I'm going to isolate this object, right click, isolate selection, go to polygon mode, zoom in here. I'm going to go to selection tool, which is also Q on the keyboard. Select this polygon and this one, make sure those are the top ones or not. So this one and this one. There we go. So those 2, let me go make sure they are the center ones. Yep. And last but not least, the far edge. Okay, so I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard to frame it. So there's a tool that we haven't used yet called Inset right here. Click Inset, and it gives me the ability to inset the selection. Check mark. Okay, and now I can actually scale this down on the x-axis to make it more square. And then I'm going to use the extrude. And again, I'm using the menu options. And I'm going to extrude it down. Click check mark. So all 3 should now have their holes. Perfect. So I'm going to end isolation mode by right-clicking, by the way. And you'll notice that it applied it to both objects, because this one is an instance of the other bar. So I don't have to do that to both bars. It's a very nice function. Okay, so let's do the suction cups. Create panel, over to cylinder, and in my top viewport here, I'm going to draw out a cylinder. Something like that. And let's go to the perspective view here. I'm going to hit Z on the keyboard to frame it. And I'm going to move it down. I don't think it's wide enough because I'm looking at this area here. So it's got a kind of a fat piece that's flattened against the metal and then a really wide head. So let's increase this diameter a little bit. Probably something like that. That's good. And let's go to the front view. I'm going to go into adding the, actually let's just decrease the height a little bit more. Probably about there. 18 sides, I'm going to bring this up to 60 to be smooth when I extrude this. I'm going to go to the polygon mode and let's go into edit poly modifier. We're going to go to polygon mode and we want to select the top polygon up here. Now if you notice, if I drag select, I grab both the top one and the sides. I can hold down Alt and deselect the sides. So now I'm going to go extrude, increase the amount, click the check mark, zoom in here, bring it up just a little bit more, something like that. Go to my scale tool, which is R on the keyboard, and scale it out. That's probably big enough, maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, it's looking good to me. So let's go ahead and isolate this guy. I'm going to right click, isolate selection, because I want to create the lip and the little bubble. So with the top polygon selected, I'm going to go inset, and I'm just going to tab it in a couple. That's good. Click the plus sign. I'm going to inset this one a lot. That's good. Hit the plus sign, and I'm going to reset this one and inset it quite a bit as well. And hit the check mark. I'm going to move this one down for the bubble area. I'm going to go to edge mode, select this edge, go loop, move it down as well. Just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, just so I know I have the edge. And that's looking good. So now, just to give you a heads up, let me go to render right now. Let me click on this icon right here. This is called render production. And you can see here, this is nice and smooth, but I don't believe this is. You can barely tell. Let me switch the color to this object to, like, let's say a light blue. And let me go render. Yeah, you can barely tell that there's these little lines going through it. Let me see if I zoom in and render. Yep, little tiny lines. And what's going on is the smoothing groups are becoming all messed up. So what I want to do is go to polygon mode, select this polygon, hold down shift so it loops all the way around, come all the way down to the bottom, and let's say set it to 1. So now if I render this, it's nice and smooth. Just like what we did before when we were working with Turbo Smooth, but this is without Turbo Smooth. This just has to do with how lighting is interacting with this particular object. I don't need to add segments. Turbo Smooth adds segments. This just deals with the polygons already set and how light bounces off their surface. So that's looking good. I'm going to call it suction cup 1. I'm going to end isolation mode and zoom out here. In fact, actually, my top viewport. Go to my move tool. There we go. Oops, I'm in polygon mode. I want to turn it off. There we go. Nothing's highlighted in here. So I'm going to hold down shift, drag it over, make it an instance, call this 2. I need actually 2 copies. Click OK. Now let me position these guys better. That's good. And that's good. Okay. So now I have all my suction cups in. Let's alt click on each one. Hold down shift and drag it back. Make sure it's set to instance and put it on the other bar. Perfect. All right. So now my suction cups are done. My legs are done. Let's talk about, there's a few extra pieces, some bars that are in here. So if I go back to this, you can see that there's an angle bar right here going down to this leg, and then these 2 side legs have a bar connecting them. So let me just create those real quick. So I'm going to hold down shift, drag this down, set it to a copy, metal bar 3, and let me just align it, align tool to this leg. I'm fine with the x-axis, pivot, pivot, click OK. Let's rotate it 90, whoops, rotate it. I'm going to move it down because this is actually fairly low to about there. Move it back into the leg, rotate it up. And let's decrease the height of the cylinder. I'm going to click, in fact, actually I'm going to click no. I'm going to click on the edit poly and delete it. I don't need the edit poly on this object. So cylinder, let's decrease the height. Just like, that's about it. Okay, so let's take this cylinder, hold on shift, drag it over, click OK. I'm going to align it to this leg back here, click OK. I'm going to flatten it out because this one is actually flat. Let's increase the height. That's good. Hold down shift because there are 2 bars in this leg. Increase the height. There you have it. So that's the understructure, except for the where the desk, see, where the keyboard normally would sit. But I'm actually not going to model that because I don't put my keyboard on it. I wish this piece actually didn't exist on my desk, but unfortunately it was like soldered or welded onto this piece, so I got to do what I got to do. Is there anything else? Suction cups, glass, wood. Okay, there is one more thing I want to go over, and that is there's a beautiful bevel on the glass here, and there's even a round edge on the wood. We need to recreate that. So if I go to my glass, and now you know how to add the edit poly modifier, let's talk about how to do that first, and then we'll talk about the new way of actually adding a bevel, which is called the chamfer modifier. So let's go edit poly. So this is for those of you running older versions of 3D Studio Max. I'm going to go to the top here, go to edge mode, and I'm going to select all the edges, the whole thing. Drag select over the whole thing. And I'm going to go to this category right here where it says chamfer. I'm going to click the settings, and it's way too much. So I'm just going to dial this, set it to 0. If I zoom in here, let me go Alt W to maximize, and I start clicking these settings up, you can see here it's now chamfering the edge, just like what we see in the picture. Now you can change you can add segments, which is not what we want to do with the glass because it's a nice cut edge. I can choose whether it's a quad chamfer or a standard chamfer. Okay, I'm going to leave it at standard. So there's a lot of options in here. I can leave it as a hole in the glass. Don't want that for sure. I can change how it's smoothing. So smooth entire object or smooth chamfer only. And I can change the degree at which it smooths. And again, this is the way the light interacts with the object. And once I'm happy, I can hit the check mark. Okay, so that is the old school way of adding chamfer, because it's technically permanent, sort of. It's an edit poly, so I can always delete it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. If you are running the old school Max, I think prior to 2014 or 15, keep it. Otherwise, we actually have a chamfer modifier. And it is right here, chamfer. And again, I'm going to set the amount down to 0. I'm going to set it to standard, and I'm going to increase it. And voila, it does the same thing. But it keeps it as its own modifier that I can keep around or delete. And because these two glass pieces are instants of each other, I don't have to apply it to the other glass piece. It's so nice. So let's go to the corner desk piece. Now this one is going to have a chamfer. So I'm going to go into adding the chamfer modifier. Again, add an edit poly and select all the edges and do chamfer and use the settings to follow along. So I'm going to set the settings to 0, dial it up, and I'm going to see what standard chamfer is going to give me first. So I'm going to dial it up, and I'm going to add segments. And you can see here it smooths it out. Very nice. I can change it to quad chamfer, and then I have to play with the tension to get it to be smooth. So it all depends on what kind of corner look for the geometry do you want. Do you want it all quads? Or do you mind having some tries? Because you can see here it's created some weird tries. I'm going to stick with the quad chamfer just for possible issues with texturing this later. And that's looking nice. And of course, I can increase or decrease how smooth it is. I mean, I can bring this almost to a hard edge too. But I want a nice round edge. And I think 3 segments are going to give it to me. Maybe even 4 should be fine. Let me click render, see if I'm getting any weird. Nope, looks good. Okay, so I can take this chamfer or edit poly modifier, which one that you have, right click on it, say copy, and I can paste it onto my other objects. Boom. Pretty cool. Now we're really getting a really nice look, and I can drag select over this stuff down here. Let me go to my front viewport. Drag select. I'm going to have to hold down Control and select the suction cups. That's looking good. Let me go back to perspective. So let me hold down Shift and drag it over. It's going to make a copy. I'm good with that. And I might as well just make it an instance. Click OK. Rotate this into position at 90 degrees. position this in the viewport. So let me go to my top view, T on the keyboard. In fact, actually, let me go Alt W. Set that back to perspective. And in my top view, let me push it down. Oh, too far. There we go. Now I need to swap these legs because they're going to be in two separate positions. It looks like everything else is working. So let me grab these legs first. Drag them down. Go something like that. And let me grab, ooh, the other leg disappears. Let me move it over for a sec. Grab these two, move them up this way. Something like that. Push these guys back down. Okay, perfect. There is the desk. Spectacular. So, reference image. I know most of this we don't see. There is a piece of wood going through the back here. I might model that out later, and it's just connecting to the two back legs. So it'd be another box. In fact, actually, let's just do that real quick. So I can select the glass. Oops, switch that back to front. Hold down Shift, drag it down. I'll call it a copy backwood underscore wood. Click OK. And I'm going to turn off, actually, yeah, I'm going to delete the chamfer. And let me just rotate it. 90 degrees. Let's decrease, not the width, the length. Let's go just a straight 7 inches. And let's scoot it back. We need to see where the legs are at. Okay, and that literally is the wood piece that sits there. Change its color to the brown. And we're looking good. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the chamfer that we have on the wood to that. So right click, copy, and paste it. And there we have it. And of course you can copy and paste this to the other side as well. I actually don't have the other piece on this side because this desk used to sit in the middle of the room and I wanted the leg room to, somebody on the other side of this desk can actually sit here. But I'll leave it at that for now. So we're looking good. So go ahead and join me for part 2. We're definitely hitting the 1 hour mark for this tutorial. So join me for part 2 and we're going to start going over texturing this thing. And then part 3 we'll model something else out.